This is Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Less than a week after the U.S. captured Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, the Coast Guard today seized two oil tankers accused of violating U.S. sanctions. One of the vessels seized in the North Atlantic was registered in Russia. The Trump administration is leaning on Venezuela to open up its oil industry to U.S. companies and to oust the influence of Russia and China. President Trump said Tuesday that Venezuela will turn over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the United States for sale. As this new era of interventionism unfolds, Greenland also appears to have returned to the top of the White House's agenda. On Monday, Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said on CNN, "Nobody is going to fight the U.S. over the future of Greenland." Representative Adam Smith is the Democratic ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. He represents Washington's 9th District in Congress. He's also my former boss. Congressman, welcome back to Soundside. I should note that we're talking about 10 a.m. Pacific time. A lot of stuff can change over the next 2 hours before this airs. Your reaction to what's gone on over the past week?
Well, first of all, there's a lot more oversight needed from Congress. The administration has not regularly briefed the committee. Well, it's not just a matter of brief. They've not regularly answered questions. In fact, I just came from a full House brief where Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, Attorney General Bondi, and CIA Director Ratcliffe, sort of walked through everything. But they haven't really answered questions from the committees of jurisdiction. They haven't done the regular updates and come in. The Undersecretary for Policy at the Pentagon refuses to come over and talk to Congress, and the Republicans in the majority refuse to force that. So we could answer these questions a lot better if they were regularly not just briefing us, but answering our questions and getting after it. Because the real question on Venezuela, well, there's a couple different pieces to it, but what comes next? Okay, the Maduro regime is still in place. I mean, Maduro's in jail, but his vice president has stepped up, and every other element and aspect of it is still there. The legitimately the democratically elected candidate, whose name is escaping me, I know Mrs. Machado was the leader.
The proxy for Machado in 2024, yeah.
Exactly. But there doesn't seem to be any particular plan to return to democracy, and that's crucial in all of this. Certainly, the U.S. has interests in the region. The rise of, drug and other criminal organizations in Latin America, the increase in crime and drug abuse, huge problems, all right? But the Venezuelan people have problems. And what gave rise to the Chavez government first and then Maduro being able to have power was the Venezuelan people feeling like basically U.S. and Western imperialism had left them in a horrible state. They wanted better lives. What are we going to do to actually deliver that for the Venezuelan people other than put Maduro in jail? Those are the questions that need to be answered. What is the plan going forward? And then the final point, when you got President Trump running around saying, we are going to run Venezuela and we want their oil, well, that is the echo of the imperialistic age that the people in Latin America so aggressively rejected and will undermine America's ability to achieve a more peaceful and stable Western Hemisphere.
You're saying you're not clear if there's a plan here. You just came from that briefing. After the briefing, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said, "We have gone into great detail," this is a quote, "with Congress about the planning. We've described it to them. In fact, it's not just winging it." What's your reaction to that?
Well, there is a plan, but there are significant gaps in that plan. The plan basically is that the threat, first of all, the threat that we went in, we took Maduro out, we can take you out too. And then the embargo on the oil, which will bring them economically to their knees where they have no choice to deal with us. So that, and Secretary Rubio says this over and over and over again during these briefs, it's not that they want to work with us, it's that they have no choice. Because we have basically threatened them to the point where they have to. Now, that part of it, okay, but where does that lead exactly? In the short term, I guess we are going to control the oil sales out of Venezuela, but where is that money going to go? Is it going to go back to the Venezuelan people to help them move forward? And then what is going to happen in terms of transitioning back to a democratic, legitimately elected government in Venezuela? Secretary Rubio will say, that's the plan. We're going to work with these people. but then we're going to transition over to a new government. Well, I think he's going to find once he tries to make that transition that those new people are going to dig in. It's one thing if you threaten them and say, if you don't give us your oil, we're going to make sure you can't sell it to anybody else. So this is the only way you're going to be able to get money. Okay, that'll probably work. It's a whole nother thing to tell these people, you're out, somebody else is in. That's when the fight is going to kick in. So yeah, they have a plan. It just doesn't necessarily, well, it doesn't have a high odds, it doesn't have high odds of success because of that problem that I just outlined. And because Trump is undermining the credibility of anything going forward by making this look like a simple, straightforward imperialistic play by America.
To that point about the remaining members, the Chavistas in power still, we talked to a Linwood-based Venezuelan American journalist who said, every part of the government, everything people interact with, all the power structures, the military, it's all Chavista. Like making that transition is going to be incredibly difficult. And as you say, they will dig in. Just really quickly, the two oil tankers that were seized today, one in the Caribbean, one in the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic one had been trailed for at least a week by the Coast Guard. They had started painting a Russian flag on the side. They had registered rapidly in Russia. Russia reportedly had an escort vessel with the tanker at some point. It's empty. It was accused of trying to violate the blockade. What's at stake here? What do you make of what's going on?
Yeah, one other point on a previous question I want to get to, and then I'll answer that. Let's be clear. Hugo Chavez destroyed the country of Venezuela and their economy. Now, they were already in trouble when Chavez came to power. They were in trouble because, well, the economic wealth was all concentrated. Venezuela, as I'm sure you're more aware than most, was an incredibly prosperous country, until the 70s and 80s. And then all kinds of problems showed up and the concentration of wealth, people didn't have opportunity. And Chavez filled that vacuum by saying, I will stand up to the imperialism and the inequality. But then he systematically looted the place. Communism and extreme socialism, the pure form of socialism, whereby they own the means of production, doesn't work. Doesn't work. It hasn't worked anywhere that it's ever been tried. All right. And it was an utter disaster for Venezuela. So that is absolutely true, but simply going back to what was a slightly less of a disaster for Venezuela is not going to open up opportunity. As far as basically the Trump administration is enforcing their embargo. And that's why they're boarding these things. Now, Venezuela made sort of a desperate play to sort of, hey, Russia, please help us. And Russia, in sort of a half-assed way, was like, sure, you can paint a Russian flag on the side. And they did diplomatically reach out to us and say, hey, this is our ship, don't board it. And we basically said, no, it's not your ship. And we know it's not your ship. And we boarded it anyway. The risk of this leading to some larger confrontation with Russia, I think, is extremely low at this point. I don't think Russia is terribly committed to this. They've got other things to worry about in Ukraine, obviously.
So President Trump has said, there are not going to be new elections in Venezuela in the next 30 days. We've talked about Delcy Rodriguez and her compatriots staying in power for now. There is a big emphasis on opening up the oil industry in Venezuela to U.S. companies. Chevron had a deal, but these other companies that had their infrastructure taken over, there's conversations about revamping that. I guess my question is this America first? It is very difficult for me to reconcile what we're seeing with the things that the president has always said on the campaign trail, et cetera. Now we're being told that our role is to have good neighbors and that this is in the, America's interest to basically start the oil production again. Like, what do you think is going on here?
I think it's a very good point. I think it's an inherent contradiction in what Trump promised. He can't even run America effectively, and now he claims he's going to go try to run Venezuela. That is directly contrary to what he said in the campaign, and it resonated with a lot of people. And I don't disagree. We got too involved in too many foreign conflicts, too involved in terms of the cost in lives and money, and too involved in terms of having an outsized idea of how we could positively affect the outcomes. That somehow we could fix Iraq, we could fix Afghanistan, we could fix fix Libya, and the lesson was, no, it's a lot more difficult and complicated than it looks, and it costs more than the gain. And now here we have Trump, certainly the Venezuela thing is happening. He's threatening Denmark over Greenland. He's threatening Cuba. He's threatening Colombia. He's threatening Canada. He's threatening Mexico. He is getting us involved in precisely the type of international conflicts and regime change operations that he said he wouldn't get us involved in. And these things don't usually end as well as they start. There's all that enthusiasm. Remember, Saddam Hussein is gone. Yay, here we go.
Mission accomplished. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about where we're at right now. And I know a lot of people in the Venezuelan community are saying, what, Democrats are supporting Maduro? I'm not with them. So, no, we're not. Maduro, terrible, awful, horrible person. All right. But what comes next is what matters. And that's where the difficulty comes in and where I don't believe the Trump administration has properly planned for this. And it's also worth noting that this is directly this is illegal. It violates international law. It violates U.S. law. And the U.S. appears to be saying to the world, sovereignty and international law are irrelevant. We do not need to obey it. And I know a lot of your listeners are like, well, we haven't been obeying it forever. Actually, we have in much more of a way than most people realize. George W. Bush had authorization, for Afghanistan, for Iraq, from the United States Congress. He came to us. In Libya, the United Nations pulled a group of people together and said, yes, we need to go and protect the Libyan people. I think those were bad ideas. Don't get me wrong, and don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. Bad policy. But Trump is saying something far more damaging to global order and to representative democracy in America. He's saying, I don't care if it's legal. I don't care if I'm making a legal argument for U.S. law, international law. It doesn't matter. If we want to do it, if we're strong enough and powerful enough to do it, we're going to go do it, and we don't care about the law. And that's a huge problem because we've seen it domestically. We've seen it with him sending troops into U.S. cities. We've seen it with the tariffs that he has imposed contrary to the law. We've seen it with him using the Justice Department to target his political enemies. Now we've seen it again with him targeting Democratic states to cut off their child care dollars. Completely violation of the appropriations laws and the way this country is supposed to be run. So undermining the rule of law does matter because it has implications for other policies as well.
Let's talk about Greenland. The Wall Street Journal said that Secretary of State Marco Rubio told lawmakers on Monday that the president intends to buy Greenland. I know that briefings, you're in a lot of classified situations that you can't talk about. Were you in that briefing? Is this something that they're planning on doing, buying? Or is this going to be something that's more of a forced situation like Stephen Miller was suggesting?
Well, again, as with all things Trump, you got to take a little bit of a step back because he likes to just sort of, throw bombs all over the place, both literally and metaphorically. And then you got to go, what the hell? Look, to some degree, different presidents over the course of, 150 years now have talked about buying Greenland. Going back to Seward, as a matter of fact. I guess after he bought Alaska, he wanted to buy Greenland. Other presidents have talked about buying Greenland as well. So that's always sort of been out there. But what is new is President Trump and Stephen Miller and others saying, another option is to take it by force. That is something that we have never said before. And again, Denmark, which has control of Greenland in a cooperative arrangement, is an ally, an incredibly important partner. And if we wanted to do something in Greenland, we have an Air Force base in Greenland. It's now a Space Force base, but I went and visited it, 3-4 months ago now. So if we wanted further access, Greenland is important to national security. It's close to the Arctic, Russia and China operating up there. Denmark's a NATO partner. If we need to meet our national security needs, we can do that. Now, the issue of minerals and oil and rare earths that may be in Greenland is a bit more complicated because how do you get to them? What are the environmental implications and all of that? But Denmark's a partner and an ally. So what's new is the president, and whatever Marco Rubio may say, well, he wants to buy it. Well, maybe he does, but he has said publicly that he is willing to take it by force if necessary. And that, I think, is really bad for U.S. interests.
Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona has called on Congress to proactively block an invasion of Greenland. Are you there? Would you support that?
Yeah, there's a couple different problems with that. I mean, what Ruben talked about was doing a war powers resolution thing, which is what we voted on. We did this for Venezuela right before the break. We had two war powers resolutions saying you can't send troops into Venezuela without congressional approval. They both failed.
Yeah, how did that go? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were close. I mean, I think we lost like one or two Democrats on one. We lost two Democrats on one Democrat on the other, got a couple of Republicans. So we're talking about a two-vote margin, but they lost. Denmark actually has reached out to members of Congress, including Senator Gallego, and said, please don't, because if we put this up and we lose, then the Trump administration can say, see, they're with us.
That
And the
looks
second
like
problem,
authorization, basically.
Right. And the second problem is presidents have routinely ignored the lack of authorization from Congress on the War Powers Resolution. What I think we ought to do is go after the money. And I've actually co-sponsored a bill with Congressman Moulton from Massachusetts to block all funds going to any military operations in Venezuela. And I think we should go after that on Colombia, on wherever because having the U.S. be the sort of bully of the Western Hemisphere, I think undermines our ability to achieve our objectives. We need partners and allies. Trump operates from the world that coercion is the only way to get people on your side. So he punches people in the face constantly and hopes it works out. I'm worried about that approach in our multipolar world that we currently live in.
Last question for you, Adam, is kind of a squishy philosophical one, but I want to get your thoughts on it. I mean, this feels like we are entering a new era of American imperialism. And I mean, just straight up imperialism, not conversations about we're going to build democracy, we're going to spread our values, et cetera, which, were part of, obviously, follies in the past that the U.S. got involved in.
Yeah.
But now it's a bare knuckle. We're there for the oil. Yes, there was a conversation about drugs ahead of time in the ramp up to Venezuela, but that was pretty quickly dispensed with when, the whole interaction with reporters happened on Saturday after the arrest of Maduro. We've seen the Trump administration obviously talk a lot about Greenland. There's been talk about Canada. There's been talk about all kinds of, intervention in Mexico. Yeah. And we extracted a mineral agreement from Ukraine as part of, talks in that conflict. Like, what does it mean that the U.S. has just kind of gone dispensed with this idea of values and is straight up talking about raw power and resources?
I think it's a huge problem. And let me just sort of walk through a couple steps in it. Because first of all, one of the problems is, and knowing the average KUOW audience, as I said, there's probably people listening going, hey, we've been doing that for 100 years. It's always been a lie. We don't care about democracy. It's all about us. And again, that's not really true. Certainly, there have been instances in a bunch of different places where we have sort of gone the raw power route. But in general, we did the Marshall Plan. We rebuilt Japan. We rebuilt Europe. We saved South Korea from North Korea. We set up, we helped set up the UN. We helped set up the IMF. We helped set up all manner of international institutions that recognize that we would resolve our differences peacefully, not through force. We tried to do that. And also, I want to point out, a lot of people say, well, we weren't fighting for democracy. That's a little bit of an oversimplification. It's true. I don't think we're always fighting for democracy. What we want is stability and a better life for people. Democracy is part of it, but you also have to have a governance structure in place that's going to work for people. Okay, so that's the world that we were living in pre-Trump. And it was a world that was very dissatisfying to a lot of people. They thought, well, gosh, America isn't really living up to our values. We're not doing enough here. We screwed up there. That isn't good. Did too much here, not enough there. But that's part of it. This is tough. I mean, trying to work with a world where you get to good, peaceful outcomes is hard if you're trying. And Trump sort of came in and said, screw it, not worth the effort. Okay, we're not going to pay attention to law. We're just going to go do what we want. So yes, we have re-entered a 19th century world of gunboat diplomacy, whereby, and then the question is, so if we're doing this by force and we're not going to pay attention to sovereignty, we're not going to pay attention to international law, what are we trying to accomplish? Is Trump trying to accomplish things that are going to be good for stability in the Western Hemisphere, good for the people of Venezuela or the people of Mexico? Or is he trying to coerce people so that one, he can be more powerful, and two, he can extract resources? And when you look at what he's had to say about Venezuela, I think the answer is pretty clear. It's not about making the Western Hemisphere a better place to live for all of us. It's about him being able to control things and take resources from people. He keeps saying over and over and over again, we're running Venezuela. It's about the oil. So, I mean, both the approach in terms of disobeying law and sovereignty, and then what you're trying to accomplish put us in, I think, a very bad place that ultimately will make us weaker and more vulnerable as we are vulnerable to other countries trying to take the same approach. This is the approach the world took for a long time, right through World War II, and it nearly exterminated the planet because we kept having war after war after war, and the wars kept growing in size. Then we won World War II and we tried to build a different order. And I think that different order has worked better over the course of the last 80 years than people give it credit for. And I think Trump just utterly detonating it is something that we should all be worried about.
Stephen Miller thinks that the West has given away so much since World War II and that it's been a complete disaster and, that we need to go back to the old ways, which is what we've been seeing. But I come back to this idea of we don't know what the order that we built post-World War II, has meant in terms of the stability, as you say, the alliances, the goodwill in
places.
Let's
just point out that for the last 80 years, from the end of World War II to now, no society in the history of human civilization has ever been as prosperous as the United States of America. Okay, so it kind of seems like maybe that worked okay. Judged against some utopian ideal? No. But judged against how every other human civilization has ever had to try to exist, pretty damn good. Now, that wealth has not been fairly distributed. But that is a matter of domestic policy more than it is a matter of foreign policy. We allowed that wealth to become too concentrated for a whole host of different reasons. But Stephen Miller saying that America has suffered the last 80 years, guy's an idiot. If he's not paying attention to what's actually happened to the world, go to all these other places in the world and say, oh gosh, you don't understand. America's really been suffering. You go to places that are experiencing famine and poverty and civil war after civil war, and we're going to go explain to them that America is the one that's been getting screwed the last 80 years? It's just, that does not make sense.
Congressman Adam Smith represents Washington's 9th District. He is the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. He's in a lot of these briefings that we've been talking about when they do happen with Congress over what's happened in Venezuela and more. Congressman, thank you very much for your time. As always, appreciate it.
Thanks, Libby. It's great to see you.
This is Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. And just a final note, every time I interview Congressman Smith, I do make a note. I worked for him in 2011. It's now been 15 years. I can't believe that. But just for transparency's sake, I was in his Capitol Hill office in D.C. Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.